Dad gave my sister Grandma's fortune, while I got an old recipe book that changed my life forever. Looking back, I should have known something was off when my parents insisted on making the big family dinner, such a production that Sunday evening. Mom had gone all out with her prime rib, something she usually reserved for Christmas or when impressing Dad's business associates. Dad had even uncorked a bottle of that pretentious Cabernet he'd been saving. Meanwhile, I was exhausted from a double shift washing dishes at Café Pontchartrain and just wanted to crash. I'm Alex Mitchell, by the way, 20 years old and living in my parents' guest room in the Garden District of New Orleans. Not the worst place to be stuck, I'll admit. Those huge oak trees dripping with Spanish moss, historic mansions everywhere you look. Tourists pay good money just to walk around here. But when you're the only person in the family without a clear direction in life, Dad's words, not mine, even paradise can feel like a prison. I just changed out of my work clothes when Mom called everyone to dinner as I headed down our ridiculously ornate staircase. Seriously, our house looks like something out of those historical home tours. I could hear my sister Emily's unmistakable laugh, that carefully practiced social media laugh that somehow managed to sound both carefree and calculated. Emily sat at the table in some designer outfit that probably cost more than my monthly rent would be if I could actually afford to move out. She was already showing Mom something on her phone, probably her latest TikTok statistics or whatever metrics 18-year-old content creators obsess over these days. 2 million followers now, can you believe it? Mom was saying, beaming with pride, and that fashion brand wants to send you free merchandise? That's incredible, honey. It's not just free stuff, Mom. Emily corrected with that patient tone she used when explaining her career to us common folk. It's a paid partnership. They're investing in my personal brand. I slid into my seat, nodding hello to everyone while trying to ignore the dull ache in my lower back from hauling industrial dishwasher racks all day. Dad looked up from his phone long enough to acknowledge me with a slight head tilt before returning to his emails. Mom served dinner with all the formality of a state function, arranging everyone's plates just so. I had to give it to her. The food looked amazing, and that smell, rosemary and garlic, and that perfect seared beef aroma. My culinary senses kicked in automatically, mentally cataloging the techniques she'd used. So, Dad finally said, putting down his phone and lifting his wine glass in what I recognized as his important announcement gesture. Your mother and I have some exciting news to share. Here we go, I thought. Another of Emily's achievements to celebrate. Probably secured that summer internship at Dad's friend's investment firm or something. We've been saving for your college fund for years, Mom continued, her smile impossibly wide. And we're thrilled to announce that Emily has been accepted to the Wharton School of Business at Penn. Emily squealed right on cue, as if this was the first she'd heard of it, though I knew she'd been talking about Wharton since sophomore year of high school, with a partial scholarship. Dad added, raising his glass higher, but we're proud to say we can cover the rest. Full ride, no loans, no debt. Our little girl is going to be set for life. Everyone clinked glasses. I forced a smile and joined the toast because that's what you do. Family first and all that. But something in my chest tightened. That's really great. I managed, and I meant it. My sister was annoying as hell sometimes with her constant phone filming and hashtag blessed attitude. But she was smart. She'd earned it. Thanks, Alex. She briefly looked up from texting what I assumed was every single person in her contact list with the news. I'm already planning my dorm tour video series. It's going to be epic. Mom served dessert, her famous bread pudding with bourbon sauce, though she called it whiskey sauce when the church ladies came over. As everyone dug in, I decided this was my moment. So I said, try a sound casual. I've been looking more into the Culinary Institute of America programs. Their New York campus has this amazing externship program where... Alex, Dad interrupted, his tone shifting to what I called a reality check voice. We've discussed this before. Cooking is a hobby, not a career path with real prospects. But Dad, it's one of the top culinary schools in the world. The alumni network alone. Do you know what the average chef makes? He didn't wait for my answer. Not enough to justify spending $40,000 a year on tuition. Certainly not enough to pay back those kind of student loans. Mom jumped in, always the mediator. What your father means is that we want you to have options, sweetie. Maybe consider community college first, get your general education credits, and then decide. I pushed my bread, putting around on the plate. The bourbon sauce that normally made my taste buds dance suddenly seemed too sweet, cloying. I've been saving, I said quietly, from both jobs. Dad laughed, not unkindly, but in that way that made me feel about 10 years old. That's commendable, son. But at the rate you're going, you'll have enough saved up around the time you qualify for Social Security. Emily, sensing tension, looked up from her phone. Hey, can't you, apply for scholarships too? I had to write 20 essays for mine. Culinary scholarships are extremely competitive. I explained, for what felt like the 100th time, and they rarely cover full tuition. Dad set down his fork with finality. Look, Emily got into Wharton. That's an investment in her future that makes sense. Business degree, connections, clear career path. You want to be a cook. Chef, I corrected automatically, and that's fine as a fallback plan. But you're a man, Alex. Men forge their own paths. Take out loans if you must, like millions of other young men do. Work your way through school. Build character. The unspoken truth hung in the air between us. They had chosen who to invest in, and it wasn't me. Later that night, I escaped to the small balcony off my room. One of the perks of living in a 19th century home renovated by parents with more money than they let on. The humid New Orleans air clung to my skin as I scrolled through my pathetically small savings account balance on my phone. $4,327.82. Almost a year of double shifts, missed hangouts, and ramen dinners. Barely enough for one semester's textbooks at CIA. I switched apps to check on my food blog. Forgotten Flavors had a whopping 342 followers, mostly other aspiring chefs and a few random accounts that probably followed me by accident. My latest post, Great-Grandpa Mitchell's Prohibition-era bourbon smoked brisket with secret Cajun spice rub, a recipe dating back to 1925, had gotten 18 likes. Grandma Sophia, my grandmother, the only person who ever took my cooking seriously. Growing up, while Emily was at dance recitals and Dad was closing deals, I'd escaped to Grandma's tiny apartment in the Bywater neighborhood. The building was nothing special, but stepping inside was like entering another world. The smells alone were worth the streetcar ride across town. Garlic and onions and secret spice blends, all simmering together in pots that had crossed an ocean decades ago. Alexander, she'd say in her thick accent, refusing to Americanize my name like my parents did. Taste this. Tell me what's missing. And I would taste her slow-smoked brisket with a secret bourbon marinade that my great-grandfather created during Prohibition, or her famous heritage gumbo, with smoked andouille and century-old spice blends passed down through 5 generations. My great-grandfather had been a chef for one of New Orleans' most exclusive private clubs back in the 1920s, and his handwritten recipes were Baba's most prized possessions. She taught me to trust my palate above all else. To understand that these ancestral recipes weren't just food. They were our family's legacy. Food is history, Alexander, she always said. When people eat your cooking, they taste not just your soul, but the souls of all who cooked before you. Your great-grandfather's spirit lives in these dishes. I was deep in these thoughts when my phone buzzed with an incoming call. Baba's face, smiling beneath her colorful headscarf, lit up my screen. I smiled. She was probably calling to share another recipe modification. She'd been experimenting with combining her famous pecan pie with a rich New Orleans-style bourbon sauce recently. Hey, Grandma, I answered. How's that ancient pecan pie recipe coming along? Silence. Then a male voice, unfamiliar. Is this Alex Mitchell? Something cold settled in my stomach. Yes. Who's this? This is Nurse Martinez at Turo Infirmary. I'm calling about Sofia Kovalenko. You're listed as her emergency contact. The world seemed to tilt slightly. What happened? Is she okay? His pause told me everything before he even spoke. I'm very sorry to inform you that Miss Kovalenko suffered a massive cardiac event earlier this evening. The paramedics did everything they could, but she passed away at 7:42 p.m. The words hit me like physical blows. Baba, gone. The one person who believed in me. There must be some mistake. I heard myself saying, voice distant and strange. I just talked to her yesterday. She was fine. The nurse was kind but firm, walking me through what would happen next. Questions about funeral homes. Next of kin. Things I couldn't process. After hanging up, I sat frozen, staring at my phone. There was a notification I hadn't noticed. A voicemail from Baba, sent just hours before she died. With shaking fingers, I pressed play. Her voice, thick with accent but clear and strong, filled the quiet night air around me. Alexander, my boy, I feel strange today, like shadow passing over sun. Maybe nothing, but old people know things sometimes. I want to tell you something important. The recipe box, the old metal one with flowers, is more than recipes. Secret compartment in bottom. Family history. Remember, Alexander, biggest treasures not always shine brightest. Our story is more important than gold. You are the keeper now. I trust only you. A pause and softer. I love you, my little chef. Make food that tells our story. The message ended. I sat there, tears streaming down my face, as the New Orleans night hummed around me. Sirens in the distance. Music floating up from somewhere in the quarter. Life continuing impossibly onward while my world had just shattered. Baba was gone, and she left me something. A secret. A treasure. For the first time in months, I felt something other than resignation creep into my heart. Tomorrow, I would go to her apartment. I would find the recipe box. And maybe, just maybe, I would finally find my way forward too. The morning after receiving the news about Grandma Sophia, I drove to her place in Bywater. The neighborhood was that perfect New Orleans mix of grit and charm. Colorful shotgun houses with peeling paint next to trendy coffee shops where hipsters paid $8 for avocado toast. Grandma's little cottage stood on a corner lot, its mint green exterior faded but still cheerful, like she'd been. I sat in my car for a moment, gathering courage. This would be the first time entering her home knowing she wouldn't be there, wooden spoon in hand, stirring something amazing on the stove. My beaten-up Honda Civic looked out of place among the Audis and BMWs that had started popping up as the neighborhood transitioned, realtor speak for gentrification. The key felt heavy in my hand as I approached the door. Inside, everything was exactly as it had always been. Lace curtains filtering the morning light, walls covered with framed photos spanning decades, and that familiar smell of herbs, spices, and something indefinably comforting. Home, more than our fancy garden district house had ever felt. I wandered through the small cottage, running my fingers along countertops and furniture. The kitchen, Grandma Sophia's domain, was a time capsule of culinary history. Cast iron pans that predated the Civil War hung alongside modern gadgets she'd embraced in her later years. Her prized KitchenAid mixer, a gift from me 3 Christmases ago, sat on the counter, still dusted with flour from whatever she'd been baking before. I couldn't finish the thought. I found her bedroom and noticed a metal recipe box on her nightstand immediately, just as she described in her final message. Antique tin with painted flowers, slightly rusted at the corners. I picked it up, feeling its solid weight in my hands. I knew inside were all her precious recipe cards, but I'd have to find time later to examine it more carefully and look for whatever secret she had mentioned. Before I could investigate further, my phone buzzed. Dad, we're meeting with Sophia's lawyer at noon. He's reading the will. Be there. No, how are you holding up? No, good morning. Just orders, as usual. 2 hours later, I was squeezed onto a leather sofa in the office of Jerome Broussard, ESQ, between Mom and Emily, who was somehow live-streaming her grief journey to her followers between signing legal documents. Dad sat ramrod straight in an armchair, looking impatient. Mr. Broussard was a balding man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He expressed genuine condolences before getting down to business, shuffling papers and clearing his throat. The last will and testament of Sophia Kovalenko is fairly straightforward, he began. The house in Bywater and all its contents are bequeathed to her only son, Richard Mitchell. Dad nodded, unsurprised. I felt a strange hollowness in my chest. The lawyer paused, adjusting his glasses. I should note that Miss Kovalenko contacted me last week about amending her will. She expressed interest in making changes that would include her grandson Alexander more prominently. He glanced at me. Unfortunately, we hadn't completed the paperwork before her passing. Dad's expression didn't change, but I noticed his jaw tighten slightly. What about her recipes? I asked, did she say anything specific about those? Mr. Broussard shook his head. Any personal effects will be included with the house contents. There's nothing specifically itemized regarding recipes or cooking materials. As we left the lawyer's office, Dad was already on his phone. Yes, I'm inquiring about listing a property in Bywater. 3-bedroom, 1 bath. Original features. Needs updating. Perfect for a flip. Mom must have noticed my expression because she placed a hand on my arm. Alex, honey, we need to be practical. Your grandmother's house requires a lot of maintenance, and none of us has time for that. I could live there, I suggested. Take care of it. Dad ended his call and turned to me with that patronizing smile I'd grown to hate. The property taxes alone would crush you, son. Besides, do you have any idea what real estate is going for in that area now? We're talking $350,000 to $400,000 easily. Emily perked up. That's like exactly what we need for Wharton and a nice apartment in Philly. It's perfect timing. Perfect timing? I echoed, my voice rising. Grandma just died, and you're counting the cash already? Don't be dramatic, Dad said coldly. Sophia would understand. She was eccentric, but practical. Mom added, softly but firmly, family has to come first. Alex, Emily's education is an investment in her future. The unspoken part hung between us. And your cooking hobby isn't. 3 days later, we held a small memorial service at Grandma's cottage. I'd spent hours making her favorite dishes, trying not to break down every time I used one of her pots or reference her handwritten notes. The food was a hit, though no one seemed to make the connection that these were Grandma's recipes, not mine. Emily wandered around the cottage taking selfies for her Heritage Appreciation content series. I found her in Grandma's bedroom, rifling through the closet. Oh my God, Alex, look at this vintage Chanel scarf. Do you think Dad would let me have it? She pulled out a silk scarf that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Grandma had surprisingly good taste for someone who dressed so basic most of the time. I was about to answer when I spotted her carelessly shoving aside a wooden chest to reach deeper into the closet. Careful with that. I rushed forward, rescuing the chest from toppling over. Emily rolled her eyes. Relax, it's just some old box. Probably full of junk. She wasn't entirely wrong. The chest was filled with books, papers, and what looked like old photographs. But when I saw a worn leather-bound volume on top, my heart skipped. This is Great-Grandpa Terra's recipe journal, I said, carefully lifting it out. Grandma told me stories about him. He immigrated here in the 1910s. Started out working alongside his wife at the post office before eventually becoming a chef at that exclusive private club in the French Quarter. Emily was already losing interest, moving on to examining jewelry boxes. Whatever. It's all going to Goodwill anyway. Dad says we need to clear everything out by next weekend. I hugged the journal to my chest, then began looking through the rest of the chest. There were sepia-toned photographs of people I'd never seen but somehow recognized. Faces with my nose, my grandmother's eyes, my sister's chin. Letters tied with faded ribbon. Documents in languages I couldn't read. Our family history, boxed up and about to be discarded. I'm keeping this, I decided aloud. Sure, take the old stuff, Emily shrugged. Less for us to deal with. The following week passed in a blur. I worked double shifts, delivered food until midnight most nights, and spent my few free hours looking through Grandma's chest of memorabilia. I carefully transported everything to my room at home, including her recipe box, though I hadn't yet found time to properly examine it or search for the secret compartment she'd mentioned in her last message. Meanwhile, Emily was preparing for her college journey with what seemed like daily Amazon deliveries of dorm essentials. Mom and Dad were deep in conversations with realtors and contractors about maximizing the return on Grandma's house. Then came Wednesday. I dragged myself home after a grueling 12-hour day at the cafe, dreaming of shower and sleep, only to find a brand new Tesla Model Y parked in our driveway, a giant red bow on the hood. Emily was bouncing up and down next to it, filming herself for her followers. Oh my God, I can't believe my parents surprised me with a Tesla for getting into Wharton. This is insane. Best family ever. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, my backpack suddenly feeling 20 pounds heavier. Mom noticed me first. Alex, come see Emily's surprise. A Tesla? I managed, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. You bought her a $65,000 car? Dad beamed proudly. Model Y long range, top safety ratings, plus it's electric, good for the environment. And the Wharton parking permit is already in the glove compartment. Emily squealed. Something snapped inside me. You told me there wasn't enough money for my culinary school, but you can buy her a Tesla? Dad's smile faded. That's different. This is... Let me guess. I cut him off. An investment in her future? Alex, don't make a scene, Mom warned, glancing nervously at Emily's still recording phone. I've been working 2 jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night, eating ramen for dinner, so I can save up for school. I said, my voice shaking. And you're dropping $65,000 on a car like it's nothing. Dad's face hardened. That's enough, Alexander. Your sister earned this. She? Earn how? By being born second instead of first? By making videos of herself unwrapping expensive stuff you already bought her. Emily gasped dramatically. Perfect for her audience. That's so mean. I work really hard on my content. Dad stepped between us. You need to adjust your attitude, young man, while you live under my roof. You'll follow my rules and show some respect. Respect? I laughed, and it sounded bitter even to my own ears. Is that what you showed Grandma when you started calling realtors during her memorial service? His face flushed dark red. That's it. Either apologize to your sister right now, or what? You'll cut me off from the money you're already not giving me, or you can find somewhere else to live, he finished coldly. My mother gasped. Richard? But I was already heading inside, taking the stairs 2 at a time. I grabbed my duffel bag and started throwing in clothes, toiletries, whatever I could fit. I carefully packed Grandma's recipe box and wrapped the leather journal in my softest t-shirt. The rest of the chest contents went into my backpack. When I came back downstairs, laden with my belongings, Mom was crying quietly. Dad stood with his arms crossed. Emily was nowhere to be seen, probably uploading the family drama for maximum engagement. Alex, please, Mom pleaded. Let's all calm down and talk about this. I looked around the house I'd grown up in, the expensive furniture, the tasteful art that meant nothing to anyone who lived there, the utter absence of anything that felt real or authentic or connected to who we actually were. You don't even understand what you're throwing away, I said quietly. The most valuable things in this family you treat like trash. Dad's expression didn't change. When you're ready to apologize, you know where to find us. I walked out without another word, tossing my bags into my Honda, which now looked even more pathetic next to the gleaming Tesla. I had about $4,800 in savings, no real plan, and nowhere to go. But I had Grandma Sophia's recipes, her secret history, and finally, for the first time in years, the freedom to chart my own course. Finding an affordable place in New Orleans should have been impossible with my budget, but somehow I lucked into a tiny apartment above a laundromat in Treem. At $800 a month, it was still highway robbery for what was essentially a shoebox with plumbing, but beggars can't be choosers when you're suddenly homeless with a duffel bag of clothes and your grandmother's recipe box. My new daily routine made my previous busy schedule look like a vacation. Morning started at 5 a.m. with my shift at Crescent City Diner, washing dishes. The hot water turned my hands red and raw despite the industrial gloves, and by lunchtime my back felt like someone had taken a baseball bat to it. I'd catch a few hours of sleep before my evening gig delivering food for Quick Bite, which at least gave me a window into how the other half lived. I'll never forget delivering a $300 sushi order to a mansion in the Garden District, less than 3 blocks from my parents' house. The guy tipped me $5 and acted like he was doing me a favor. Meanwhile, my bank account was hovering around $4,100 and dropping fast as rent, utilities, and basic survival chipped away at my savings. But my apartment, small as it was, became my sanctuary. I'd set up my tiny kitchen with Grandma Sophia's most essential tools, her cast iron skillet, favorite chef's knife, and a few irreplaceable spice blends she'd mix herself. The recipe box sat prominently on my single bookshelf, along with Great-Grandpa Tara's journal and the other family memorabilia I'd rescued. My life might have continued in this depressing, holding pattern, if not for Jade. I'd met her a few weeks before Grandma died, when she started working at the cafe where I washed dishes. She was actually a server at Bayou, one of the top-rated restaurants in the city, but picked up morning shifts at the cafe to make extra money. My parents own a restaurant group in Chicago, she explained during our first real conversation. They insisted I get a business degree before they'd let me anywhere near their kitchens. So I studied finance at Tulane, fell in love with New Orleans, and decided to stay. Now I'm working my way up on my own terms. After I got kicked out, Jade started coming over to my shoebox apartment. She claimed it was because my kitchen, tiny as it was, had better energy than her much nicer place in Mid-City. But I think she just felt sorry for me. One night, after a particularly brutal shift where I'd washed what felt like every plate in Louisiana, Jade arrived with a small grocery bag. "We're cooking tonight," she announced, brushing past me into the apartment. And not just ramen, something real. I was too exhausted to argue. I watched as she unpacked duck breasts, fresh cherries, and a couple of pears. "What's all this for?" "You keep talking about your great-grandfather's recipes. I want to try one," she said, nodding toward Tara's journal that sat on my counter. "Show me what makes them so special." That night, we cooked Great-Grandpa's duck breast with roasted pears and cherry bourbon sauce. The recipe combined French techniques with Southern ingredients and what Grandma always called the old country touch, a specific way of balancing flavors that wasn't quite like anything else. As we cooked, I found myself telling Jade stories about Grandma Sophia, about growing up between two worlds, about feeling like the family disappointment. When we finally sat down to eat, Jade took one bite and went completely silent. "That bad?" I asked nervously. She shook her head slowly, eyes wide. "Alex, this is incredible. I've never tasted anything like it. It's somehow both unfamiliar and nostalgic at the same time." We ended up cooking late into the night, trying different recipes from the journal, and talking about food in that intense way only other culinary obsessives understand. By the time she left at 3 a.m., something had shifted between us. The next day, Jade showed up at her phone on a small tripod. "We're making TikToks," she announced. I laughed, thinking she was joking. "Right, because the world needs another cooking video." "No, the world needs your cooking videos," she insisted. "These recipes, your great-grandfather's story, your grandmother passing them down. It's authentic. People crave that. Plus, you're not bad to look at, and you've got that whole underdog with a dream thing going on. So, basically, you want to exploit my tragic life for views?" "Exactly," she grinned. "But in a way that might actually help you. Building a following could lead to opportunities." I was skeptical, but what did I have to lose? We started with Great-Grandpa's famous bourbon glazed ribs with a spice rub that combined traditional Southern flavors with unexpected additions. Jade filmed me cooking, adding commentary about where the recipe came from and how my grandmother had preserved these forgotten techniques. Our first few videos got a few hundred views, nothing spectacular. But people who did watch seemed genuinely interested, asking questions about the techniques and ingredients. We kept at it, posting 2 or 3 times a week between our work schedules. After about a month, Jade came to me with exciting news. "I can get you an interview at Bayou," she said, practically bouncing with excitement. "Junior line cook position. The pay is garbage, but it's a foot in the door at a Michelin-starred kitchen." My heart nearly stopped. You can do that? I've been there for 2 years and have the ear of Chef Michael. And he needs someone ASAP. One of his line cooks just quit without notice. Her expression grew serious. This is a real opportunity. Alex, don't blow it. Chef Michael DeVoe was a legend in New Orleans, a James Beard winner known for elevating Creole cuisine to new heights. The interview was terrifying, but somehow I managed not to make a complete fool of myself. When he asked about my background, I mentioned working with my grandmother's recipes, but downplayed the whole family tradition angle, afraid it would sound amateurish. What saved me was the tasting portion. Chef Michael handed me ingredients and told me to make a sauce that would complement a seared scallop. Without thinking, I made a variation of one of Great-Grandpa Terra's preparations, a butter-based sauce with citrus, a hint of bourbon, and a specific blend of herbs that Grandma Sophia had drilled into me. Chef Michael tasted it, raised his eyebrows, and offered me the job on the spot. Working at Bayou was like culinary boot camp. I went from working 60-hour weeks to 80-hour weeks, from being tired to being completely drained, physically and mentally. But I was learning more in a day than I had in months of self-study. Chef Michael was demanding but fair, and occasionally he'd take a special interest in my development, showing me techniques that took years to master. "You have an unusual palate," he told me once, after I'd suggested a modification to one of the sauce preparations. "You understand balance in a way that can't be taught." I wanted to tell him it was my great-grandfather's influence, my grandmother's training, but something held me back. Maybe I was afraid he wouldn't take me seriously if he knew I was cooking from old family recipes rather than formal training. 3 months into my time at Bayou, disaster struck. We received word that Anthony Blair, the notorious food critic and Instagram influencer with over 5 million followers, would be dining with us that evening. The entire kitchen went into panic mode. Chef Michael drilled us mercilessly all afternoon on the tasting menu Blair would be served. Then, an hour before service, Chef Michael got a call. His son had been in a car accident in Baton Rouge. Nothing life-threatening, but he had to go immediately. His parting words to our sous chef Jerome were clear. Stick to the menu. No improvisation. Everything exactly as we practice. But then Jerome started sweating profusely, looking pale. Within 20 minutes, he was violently ill. Food poisoning from a street taco he'd eaten for lunch. With both Chef Michael and the sous chef out, the kitchen was in chaos. The general manager, Vivian, was having a meltdown. "Who's going to prepare Blair's main course?" she demanded, looking around the kitchen at the remaining line cooks, all of us too junior to handle such pressure. Then her desperate gaze landed on me. "You, Alex, Chef Michael said you have good instincts. You'll have to do it." My mouth went dry. The duck breast of the foie gras? It was Bayou's signature dish, the one Chef Michael had perfected over years. I took a deep breath and nodded, but as I began prep, a wild, possibly suicidal idea took hold of me. Blair was known for being bored with traditional fine dining. His most viral reviews came when he experienced something genuinely innovative. In that moment, I made what was either the bravest or stupidest decision of my culinary career. I decided to prepare Great-Grandpa Terra's duck breast with roasted pears and cherry bourbon sauce instead of Chef's signature dish. Jade, who was serving that night, nearly had a heart attack when she realized what I was doing. "Are you insane?" she whispered furiously in the kitchen. "That's not the dish we practiced. You're risking everything." "Trust me," I said, with far more confidence than I felt. "This dish is special." When Blair's main course went out, I thought I might throw up from nerves. I watched through the kitchen doors as he took his first bite. His expression gave nothing away. For 15 excruciating minutes, I continued cooking for other tables while stealing glances at Blair, who was typing on his phone between bites. Then something unexpected happened. Blair called Jade over and asked to speak to the chef who prepared his duck. Vivian intercepted, explaining that Chef Michael was unavailable, but Blair insisted on meeting whoever had cooked his meal. With Vivian glaring daggers at me, I wiped my hands on my apron and walked out to Blair's table. "You made this duck?" he asked, eyebrow raised. I nodded, too terrified to speak. It's the most innovative dish I've had in New Orleans this year, possibly the entire South. He was already pulling out his phone. We need a photo for the gram. What's your name? Alex Mitchell. I managed to say. By the time I returned to the kitchen, my phone was blowing up with notification alerts. Blair had already posted with the caption, "This unknown chef just served me the most exciting fusion of Creole and Eastern European flavors I've ever experienced." Remember the name Alex Mitchell. At Bayonne Orleans has been hiding a star. My elation lasted exactly 12 minutes, right until Chef Michael called Vivian. Her face transformed as she listened, and I knew I was finished. "You're fired," she announced in front of the entire kitchen when she hung up. "And you," she turned to Jade, "you knew about this. You're done too. Clear out your lockers now." But Blair loved it. I protested. His post is already getting thousands of likes. Chef Michael was clear. "No deviations from menu. You deliberately disobeyed direct instructions. Get out." The next day, Chef Michael returned and refused to reconsider, despite Blair's post now having gone viral with over 200,000 likes. "Discipline in the kitchen is non-negotiable," he said coldly. "What you did was unprofessional, regardless of the outcome." Later, Jade heard through her connections that Michael had been furious not because I broke protocol, but because Blair had praised my cooking above his. The post made it sound like I was a culinary genius behind Bayou, not Michael. Just like that, we were both blacklisted from any high-end restaurant in New Orleans. Word spread quickly about our unprofessional behavior, and no one would touch us. Within a week, I was back to washing dishes, this time at a tourist trap in the French Quarter that served frozen gumbo reheated in microwaves. One night, after a particularly humiliating shift where a busboy had told me I'd miss a spot on a clearly clean plate, I sat in my tiny apartment staring at the wall. "I don't get it," I said to Jade, who'd brought over takeout. Blair, the most influential food critic in the South, loved my food. He posted about it. People were asking about me. How am I back to washing dishes? "The restaurant industry is all about who you know and who you pissed off," Jade said with a shrug. "And we pissed off some powerful people. If I just had my own place," I sighed, "somewhere I could cook my own food my own way. But that's a pipe dream. I'd need at least $50,000 just to get started with the smallest possible setup, and at this rate, I'll be 80 before I save that much." Later that night, after Jade left, I couldn't sleep. I pulled out Great-Grandpa Terrace's journal, flipping to the pages for comfort, reading his notes and observations about flavors and techniques. His handwriting reminded me of Grandma Sophia's, slightly slanted, with distinctive loops on the G's and Y's. As I turned a page describing his secret method for making the perfect roux, something small and rectangular fluttered out onto my lap. At first, I thought it was just a bookmark, but when I picked it up, I realized it was something else entirely, a tiny, aged piece of paper about the size of a postage stamp. I stared at the tiny paper rectangle in my palm, initially assuming it was just some old bookmark. It was yellowish with age, about the size of a postage stamp, and featured what looked like 3 circles with a numeral in the center, all in a vivid yellow color. Wait, it actually was a postage stamp. That made sense, since Great-Grandpa Terrace had worked at the post office before becoming a chef. He probably just used an old stamp as a placeholder in his recipe journal. Still, something about it looked unusual. The ornate design and vibrant yellow color seemed weirdly pristine despite its obvious age. I snapped a photo and sent it to Jade with the caption, "Found this in Great-Grandpa's journal. Probably nothing, but kinda cool old stamp." 3 minutes later, my phone rang. "Don't move, don't touch it, don't even breathe on it," Jade said, her voice tight with emotion I couldn't identify. "I'm coming over right now." "It's just an old stamp," I laughed. "What's the big deal?" "Alex, I just ran a reverse image search. If that's what I think it is, just don't touch it, okay? I'll be there in 15 minutes. True to her word, Jade arrived in record time, practically sprinting up the stairs to my apartment. She had her laptop under her arm and was out of breath when I opened the door. "Show me," she demanded, brushing past me. I pointed to where I'd carefully placed a stamp on a clean kitchen towel. Jade pulled out a pair of tweezers from her purse. Why she carried tweezers, I'll never know, and gently lifted the stamp to examine it under my desk lamp. She then opened her laptop and began comparing images. "Do you have any idea what this is?" she asked, her voice hushed. "A postage stamp my great-grandfather used as a bookmark. This isn't just any stamp." She turned her laptop to face me. "This looks like the Trace-Gilling yellow. It's a Swedish stamp from 1855 with a printing error. It was supposed to be green, but a few were accidentally printed in yellow. Until now, only one was known to exist in the world, and it sold at auction for $2.3 million in 2010. I laughed. This had to be a joke. Yeah, right. And my great-grandfather just happened to have a multi-million-dollar stamp tucked into his recipe book. He worked at the post office, right? In the early 1900s? Stamps from the 1800s would still have been around, maybe even in circulation for special international mail. Or perhaps he was a collector. I shook my head. No way. It's probably just some common stamp that looks similar. "There's one way to find out," Jade said, already typing furiously. "We need to talk to an expert." 2 days later, we were sitting in the cluttered back office of Bernard Meyer, a philatelist, fancy word for stamp collector, who'd been in business for over 40 years in the French Quarter. His tiny shop was sandwiched between a tourist trap selling authentic voodoo dolls and a bar that claimed to have invented 4 different classic cocktails. Bernard examined the stamp through a jeweler's loupe. His breath held for so long, I thought he might pass out. When he finally spoke, his voice had a slight tremor. "In 38 years of professional authentication, I've never seen anything like this. The paper composition, the printing technique, the color saturation. It all matches a period and the known characteristics of the Trace-Gilling yellow." He looked up at us. "Where did you say you found this?" I explained about Great-Grandpa Terra's journal. Bernard nodded thoughtfully. Many European immigrants brought valuable items with them when they came to America, family heirlooms, rare collectibles, sometimes even just as packing material without realizing their worth. Your great-grandfather may not have known what he had. Bernard couldn't make an official authentication. That would require experts from major auction houses. But he referred us to someone at Sotheby's, New York, who specialized in rare philatelic items. "If this is authentic," he said as we were leaving, "you're sitting on a fortune. But keep it quiet until it's verified. The stamp world can be surprisingly cutthroat." The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I kept the stamp in Bernard's protective sleeve, locked in a small fireproof safe I'd purchased, which I then stored at Jade's apartment because it felt safer than my place above the laundromat. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, convinced someone had broken in and stolen it, only to remember it wasn't even in my apartment. Finally, we received an email from Claudia Winters at Sotheby's requesting a meeting. We scraped together enough for 2 budget airline tickets to New York, and Jade convinced her cousin to let us crash on a sofa in a 5th-floor walk-up in Astoria. Sotheby's headquarters felt like another world. All marble floors, hushed voices, and artwork worth more than I'd earned in several lifetimes. We were led to a conference room where Claudia, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, waited with 2 colleagues. What followed was the most nerve-wracking 3 hours of my life. They examined the stamp under specialized equipment, comparing it to high-resolution images of the known Trace-Gilling yellow. They asked detailed questions about its provenance, how it came into my possession, where it had been stored, if anyone else knew about it. And then the moment of truth. "Mr. Mitchell," Claudia said, her professional demeanor giving nothing away, "based on our preliminary examination, we believe this to be an authentic Trace-Gilling yellow stamp from 1855. I gripped the edge of the table. Jade squeezed my knee under the table, so hard it hurt. "We would like to formally invite you to consign this item for our autumn rarities auction," Claudia continued. "Given the extreme rarity, this would be only the 2nd confirmed example in existence. We estimate a hammer price of between $1.5 and $2.5 million, potentially higher given its near-mint condition." I must have looked like I was going to pass out because someone handed me a glass of water. $2 million? For a tiny piece of paper that had been sitting in a recipe book for who knows how long? "We'll need to conduct additional authentication processes," one of the colleagues added. And there will be necessary paperwork, insurance considerations, and commission structures to discuss. On the subway ride back to Queens, Jade and I sat in stunned silence. It wasn't until we were walking up the endless stairs to her cousin's apartment that she finally spoke. "You realize what this means, right?" I nodded slowly. "If it sells, I could actually open my own restaurant. A real one, not some hypothetical dream." "Not just any restaurant," Jade corrected. "The restaurant. The one you've always talked about, with your family recipes and your great-grandfather's vision." That night, as Jade slept on her cousin's uncomfortable pull-out sofa, and I attempted to make the even less comfortable air mattress work, a new fear crept in. What if my parents found out? Would they try to claim the stamp as rightfully theirs, since it technically came from Grandma Sophia's possessions? The next morning, I called a lawyer specializing in estate matters. After explaining the situation, he reassured me. "Since your father explicitly discarded the chest and its contents, essentially abandoning the property, and you took possession of it with no objection at the time, you have a strong claim to ownership. Additionally, the stamp wasn't specifically mentioned in your grandmother's will, and your possession of it for several months strengthens your position." Still, to be safe, I had him draft a formal document stating my ownership claim, which I filed away. The weeks leading up to the auction were a bizarre mix of extreme secrecy and careful planning. Jade and I started developing a business plan for the restaurant, researching locations, licensing requirements, equipment costs, staffing needs, everything we need to hit the ground running if the auction was successful. We also decided that, regardless of the outcome, we wouldn't tell anyone about the stamp until after the auction. Not my parents, not Emily, not even our closest friends. The fewer people who knew, the better. The auction was scheduled for a Tuesday in October. Sotheby's had marketed the stamp extensively within the Philatelic community, and there was significant buzz among collectors. Jade and I flew back to New York the day before, dressed in the nicest clothes we owned, which weren't that nice, and tried not to throw up from nervousness. The auction room was packed with serious-looking people in expensive suits, a few museum representatives, and several collectors joining remotely via phone or internet. Jade and I sat in the back, trying to be inconspicuous. When Lot 42, my stamp, came up, the auctioneer gave a brief history of the Trace-Gilling Yellow, explaining its rarity and significance. Then, the bidding began at $1 million. I watched in disbelief as the number climbed rapidly. 1.2 million, 1.5 million, 1.8 million. A brief pause, then a phone bidder pushed it to 2 million. Another bidder countered with 2.1 million. The room felt electric as the price continued to rise. 2.3 million, 2.5 million, 2.7 million. At 3 million, the bidding slowed, with just two parties still in the game, a phone bidder and someone online. After a few more tense exchanges, the final hammer price landed at a staggering $3.2 million. I gripped Jade's hand so tightly I'm surprised I didn't break her fingers. After Sotheby's commission and taxes, I would clear just over $2 million. $2 million from a scrap of paper found in a book that my sister had deemed trash. The following weeks were a whirlwind. The money was transferred into a newly created bank account. We met with financial advisors who helped us structure the funds for both immediate use and long-term investment. I set aside money for taxes, a modest apartment upgrade, and a small emergency fund. The rest, about $1.6 million, went toward our restaurant dream. We found the perfect location in the Marigny neighborhood, just outside the French Quarter. It was an old building with character, exposed brick walls, high ceilings, and large windows that had previously housed a furniture store. The asking price was steep, but within our budget, and owning the building outright rather than leasing would save us in the long run. I naively thought that having money would make opening a restaurant easy. I was hilariously wrong. The permits alone nearly drove me to madness. New Orleans has some of the most complex regulations for historic buildings, and our location required approvals from multiple agencies: historical preservation, zoning board, health department, fire safety, alcohol licensing. Each office seemed to operate on its own timeline and in complete isolation from the others. Then came construction issues. Our building, which the realtor had cheerfully described as needing minor updates, turned out to be hiding major structural problems behind its charming facade. The plumbing was a disaster. The electrical system was a fire waiting to happen, and the kitchen ventilation system, non-existent by modern standards. Our initial renovation budget doubled, then nearly tripled. Our projected opening date slipped from January to March, then to May. But through all the headaches, a vision was taking shape. We named the restaurant Terrace Legacy, honoring my great-grandfather. The design incorporated elements of both Creole and Eastern European aesthetics, rich colors, handcrafted woodwork, and vintage photographs of New Orleans and the old country that I found in Grandma Sophia's chest. The menu would feature Great-Grandpa Terrace's unique fusion recipes, updated with modern techniques but faithful to his original vision. Each dish would come with a story, printed on the menu or shared by the servers, connecting the food to its origins. While contractors worked on the building, Jade and I focused on building our team. We specifically looked for talented cooks who, like me, had been overlooked or undervalued by the established restaurant scene. People with passion and skill, but perhaps without the pedigree or connections typically needed to advance. Jade also developed a comprehensive social media strategy. We created content telling the story of Great-Grandpa Terrace, his journey to America, and his culinary vision. We shared glimpses of his recipes, the renovation process, and philosophy behind our restaurant. The hashtag Forgotten Flavors started gaining traction, with food enthusiasts eager to experience something genuinely unique in a city already famous for its cuisine. As the opening date approached, the pressure intensified. A week before our scheduled launch, the health inspector arrived for the final check. Everything looked great until he reached the kitchen ventilation system. This doesn't meet the updated code requirements that went into effect last month, he explained, pointing to a technical specification that might as well have been written in ancient Sumerian for all I understood it. The fix would cost nearly $100,000 and require at least a week of work, meaning we'd have to delay our opening. Our investors, mostly Jade's family members who had contributed smaller amounts to supplement my stamp money, suggested postponing. Better to open late than to rush and get bad reviews, they reasoned. But we had already booked a full house for opening night, including several food critics and influencers. Rescheduling would be a logistical nightmare and could generate negative buzz before we even served our first meal. After a sleepless night of deliberation, Jade and I made a bold decision. We would take the financial hit, hire round-the-clock contractors to fix the ventilation issue, and use the delay to our advantage. We announced on social media that we were perfecting every detail for an even more spectacular opening the following week, and offered a special preview tasting for those who had reserved tables for the original date. The strategy worked. The preview tasting generated even more excitement, with guests posting sneak peeks of our food and interior. By the time our official opening night arrived, the anticipation had reached fever pitch. And then the moment of truth came, our first official service. The restaurant was packed, the kitchen was humming, and every table was filled. Among our guests was Anthony Blair, the food critic whose review of my duck dish had gone viral, and indirectly got me fired from Bayou. He recognized me immediately. "The rebel chef," he exclaimed, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "I knew you were destined for bigger things than working under someone else's thumb." Throughout the evening, Blair documented his meal on Instagram stories. 12 posts detailing everything from the ambience to the plating to the flavor combinations. With each dish, his enthusiasm grew more evident. "This," he declared in his final story, showing a close-up of our signature duck breast with roasted pears and cherry bourbon sauce, "is what happens when culinary tradition meets innovation, when forgotten flavors are rediscovered by someone who understands both their history and their potential." At Terrace Legacy isn't just the best new restaurant in New Orleans. It's a cultural landmark in the making. By the time we closed for the night, our reservation system had crashed from a volume of requests, and a small crowd had gathered outside hoping for last-minute cancellations. Jade's phone was blowing up with media inquiries, and my inbox was filled with congratulatory messages from chefs across the city. I stood in the empty dining room after everyone had left, trying to process what had just happened, from washing dishes to owning a successful restaurant in less than a year. from being the family disappointment to being featured in national food media, all because of a little yellow stamp that my sister had nearly thrown away. Sometimes life's most valuable treasures really don't shine the brightest at first glance. It's wild how quickly life can change. 1 year after opening Terrace Legacy, I barely recognized my own life. Our little restaurant had morphed from a hopeful venture into New Orleans' hottest reservation, with a 3-month waiting list that celebrities and food critics couldn't even bypass. Food and Wine magazine had just named me Most Innovative Young Chef of the Year, and my TikTok following had somehow ballooned to over 5 million, eclipsing Emily's beauty influencer stats by a solid million. The best part? I was cooking my great-grandfather's recipes, dishes that had nearly been lost forever, tossed away with what my family considered worthless junk. Every night, I'd watch people's faces light up as they tasted combinations of flavors they'd never experienced before. That connection, that moment of culinary discovery, it was better than any award. Things really kicked into high gear when Anthony Blair introduced me to some Netflix executives who were looking to develop new food content. Within weeks, we were hammering out the details for Forgotten Flavors of America, a show where I'd travel the country discovering lost recipes from various immigrant communities. The concept was to uncover the dishes that didn't make it into mainstream American cuisine, but deserved recognition. The culinary equivalent of my great-grandfather's recipe journal. The contrast with my pre-stamp life couldn't have been more stark. While I was flying between New Orleans and meetings in L.A., driving through small towns in search of authentic ethnic cuisine, and running a kitchen that was now the talk of the culinary world, my sister Emily's life was taking a different trajectory. She dropped out of Wharton midway through her second semester, claiming the academic pressure was toxic to her creative process. From what I gathered through occasional social media glimpses, she was trying to rebrand herself as a business coach for aspiring influencers, but her content was getting minimal engagement. Her last post I saw was a desperate plea for her followers to join her $497 Millionaire Mindset Blueprint course. It had 17 likes. I wasn't taking pleasure in her struggles. Well, maybe a tiny bit. I'm only human, but it was validating to see the family golden child failing while the aimless son was thriving. I hadn't spoken directly to my parents or Emily since the night I walked out with my duffel bag and Grandma Sophia's recipe box. They hadn't reached out either, and despite my growing local fame, they seemed completely unaware of what had happened with my life. I'd changed my appearance somewhat, growing a beard and letting my hair get longer, and my full name Alexander Mitchell was rarely used in press, where I was usually referred to simply as Chef Alex of Terrace Legacy, which is why I nearly dropped a tray of appetizers when I glanced out into the dining room one Tuesday evening and saw them, Mom, Dad, and Emily, being seated at table 12. Is that? Jade, now my fiancée and business partner, trailed off as she followed my gaze. Yep, the whole Mitchell clan. Do they know this is your restaurant? She whispered. Doesn't look like it, I replied, watching as they settled in, examining the menu with no apparent recognition that they were about to eat food prepared by their estranged son. I stayed in the kitchen, periodically peeking through the service window like some culinary stalker. When they ordered, my heart nearly stopped. Dad had chosen our signature dish, the Creole Ukrainian borscht with cornbread croutons and crayfish oil. It was Grandma Sophia's recipe, enhanced with Great-Grandpa Tara's special spice blend and my own modern twist. When the server brought their food, I couldn't help myself. I had to see their reactions. I positioned myself near the bar, pretending to discuss wine pairings with our sommelier, while actually eavesdropping shamelessly. Dad took his first spoonful of the borscht, and his reaction was everything I hadn't realized I was hoping for. His eyes widened, he froze mid-bite, and then slowly lowered a spoon. This is exactly like my mother's borscht, he said, his voice carrying the momentary lull of dining room chatter. But somehow even better. This is impossible. Mom and Emily leaned in to taste it, looking skeptical, then surprised. Dad waved over their server. Who's cooking this? This tastes like my family's recipe. It's too specific to be a coincidence. The server, noticing my not-so-subtle observation from the bar, caught my eye. I gave a small nod. Actually, sir, the chef owner is here tonight. I'll see if he's available to speak with you. I took a deep breath, straightened my chef's jacket, and walked across the dining room floor that suddenly felt a mile long. Their backs were to me, so they didn't see me approach until I was standing right at their table. "I heard you had a question about the borscht," I said. 3 heads snapped up simultaneously. The sequence of emotions that crossed their faces would have been comical under different circumstances. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, and then something more complicated. "Alex," Mom managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hello, Mom." "Dad." "Emily." I nodded to each of them. "Welcome to Terrace Legacy." Dad looked around at the packed restaurant, the sophisticated decor, the staff bustling efficiently, then back to me in my chef's whites. "This is all yours?" Emily, never one for subtlety, blurted out what they were all thinking. "How could you possibly afford this? Did you take out massive loans or something?" I couldn't help the small smile that tugged at my lips. "Remember that old stuff you were so eager to throw away after Grandma died? Turns out great-grandpa Terra's left something more valuable than just recipes." Their blank stares told me they needed more explanation. There was a stamp hidden in his recipe journal, a rare Swedish stamp from 1855 with a printing error. It sold at Sotheby's for $3.2 million. The color drained from Dad's face. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Emily looked like she might actually faint. $3 million, Dad repeated, as if the words themselves were in a foreign language. I nodded. "But the recipes, the ones you all dismissed as worthless, those turn out to be the real treasure. They're the soul of this place. People come from all over the country to taste great-grandpa Terra's food." Dad opened his mouth to say something, but was interrupted by a nearby diner asking for my autograph. By the time I'd finished the brief interaction, the mood at my family's table had shifted. Dad looked angry, Mom anxious, and Emily just stunned. "Enjoy your meal," I said politely. "It's on the house tonight." I walked away, my heart hammering in my chest, feeling both vindicated and oddly hollow. There was no joy in their shock, only the confirmation of how little they'd valued what had mattered most to me. I wasn't surprised when Dad showed up at the restaurant the next morning before opening hours, a lawyer in tow. He looked like he hadn't slept. "That stamp was my mother's property," he began without preamble. "Legally, it should have passed to me as her heir. We're prepared to file an injunction." "Save it, Dad." I cut him off, sliding a folder across the counter. "These are the legal documents establishing my ownership claim to the stamp. Your lawyer can review them, but the short version is that you explicitly abandoned that property when you declared it junk and told me to take it if I wanted. You have no claim." His lawyer reviewed the papers with a deepening frown, then whispered something in Dad's ear that made his face turn red. "This isn't right," Dad insisted, though with less conviction. "That money should have been for the family. You took advantage." "Of what?" "Your carelessness, your dismissal of anything that didn't fit your narrow definition of value." I was surprised by how calm I felt. "You're right that the money should have benefited the family. That's exactly what I've done with it. I'm honoring great-grandpa Terra's and Grandma Sophia by sharing their culinary legacy with the world." The confrontation didn't end there. Dad stormed out, but the damage was done. Someone, probably their lawyer, leaked the story to the local press. From dishwasher to millionaire. Local chef's family feud over fortune found in recipe book read the headline in the New Orleans Advocate. The publicity, ironically, only boosted our already thriving business. People came in asking about the $1,000,000 recipes and the story behind the restaurant. 2 weeks later, Dad showed up again, this time alone. He looked different, deflated, almost. He asked if we could talk privately, and I led him to my small office in the back. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began awkwardly, "about how I treated you, about the choices I made." I waited, not making it easier for him. "When I was your age, I wanted to be a jazz musician," he continued, staring at his hands. "I was pretty good, too, but my father, your grandfather, said it wasn't a real career, said I needed to be practical, responsible. So I went to business school, got a corporate job, built the life he thought I should have." He looked up at me. "When you talked about cooking, All I could think was that you were making the same mistake I thought I had made, following a passion instead of a practical path. I pushed Emily toward business school because I was convinced that was the only road to security. But you were wrong, I said quietly. About so many things, he agreed. Watching you succeed by following your heart, it forced me to confront my own regrets, and then to realize I'd nearly pushed you into repeating my mistakes, not yours. It wasn't an instant reconciliation. There were more conversations, difficult, honest ones, over the following months. Mom joined some of them. Emily, still bitter about her Wharton failure, took longer to come around. But gradually, tentatively, we began rebuilding something that felt like family. 2 years after opening Terrace Legacy, life had settled into a new kind of normal. Jade and I had gotten married in a small ceremony in the restaurant's courtyard. We'd opened a second location in Chicago, a nod to her family roots there. And we were expecting our first child, a boy we planned to name Terrace. Dad had taken early retirement and, in a plot twist I never saw coming, started playing jazz piano 3 nights a week in our restaurant's bar area. Turns out he really was pretty good. Mom had become our unofficial restaurant historian, lovingly telling guests about the family recipes and traditions behind each dish. Even Emily had found her footing. After her influencer career fizzled, she'd gone back to school for interior design and discovered a genuine talent for it. She'd helped design our Chicago location and was already sketching ideas for the 3rd restaurant we were planning for Austin. One quiet Sunday evening, with the restaurant closed and everyone gone home, I was sitting at the bar doing paperwork when I remembered something that had been nagging at the back of my mind for months. Grandma Sophia's final message had mentioned a secret compartment in the bottom of her recipe box, something I'd completely forgotten about in the excitement of finding the stamp and opening the restaurant. I retrieved the metal recipe box from my office, where it held a place of honor on my bookshelf. I'd been using it for its intended purpose, storing recipe cards, but had never examined it closely for any hidden features. Turning it over in my hands, I noticed subtle seams on the bottom that didn't appear to be part of the original construction. I pressed gently on different spots until I heard a faint click and a small drawer slid out from the base. Inside was an old coin and a folded letter in Grandma Sophia's handwriting. The coin was gold, tarnished with age, with unfamiliar symbols and a date that looked like 1853. I carefully unfolded the letter, the paper thin and delicate. My dear Alexander, it began, "If you are reading this, you have discovered what I always hoped you would find. This coin belonged to my father, your great-grandfather Terrace. It is a rare Hungarian gold ducat, given to him by a grateful aristocrat whose life he saved during a kitchen fire. My father believed it brought him luck throughout his journey to America and his life here. He passed it to me when I was young, saying that true wealth is not in what we own, but in what we create and who we become. I have kept this coin safe all these years, and now I pass it to you. Your father would likely sell it without understanding its true value. But you, my dear boy, know that some treasures are beyond price. With all my love, your Baba." I called Jade immediately, and together we researched the coin online. To our shock, similar coins had recently sold at auction for over $1 million. But as we sat there, holding this piece of family history, we both knew without discussion that we would never sell it. "Maybe it really is lucky," Jade mused, resting her hand on her pregnant belly. "Look how everything changed for you right after your grandmother passed it on, even though you didn't know you had it." I smiled, tucking the coin back into its hiding place. Maybe great-grandpa Terrace was right all along. In life, the things that seem insignificant, a recipe, a stamp, a coin, can turn out to be the most valuable, but only if you recognize their worth. Later that evening, I took out Great-Grandpa Terrace's recipe journal and began adding some of my own creations to its pages, continuing the legacy he begun over a century ago. When I finished, I slipped in a copy of our baby's ultrasound picture alongside my grandmother's letter and the lucky coin. "The greatest wealth," I wrote beneath it, "is the story we pass on."